Saquon Barkley is on the cover of Madden 2026. I think it caps off potentially the most accomplished non-quarterback individual season for an NFL player in league history. I'll make the case for that coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. Thanks so much for making us a part of your day each and every day. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase, and on today's edition of the show, we got to talk about Saquon Barkley, who has officially been named as the head player on the cover of, and the only player on the cover of Madden 2026. And of course, the main play of the season, the backwards hurdle against the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Kelly Green, is what is going to be featured on the cover of Madden 26. I think it was obvious, right, when he made that play. One of the most historic, memorable plays, highlight reel plays in the history of the NFL. Considering the trajectory he was on, and we all know now he went on to have, I think, the greatest individual season a running back has ever had, I think we knew it was coming, especially when they won the Super Bowl, too, that this was going to be the cover of Madden. Now it is official, and I think it's awesome. I know the Madden curse was something for years growing up that we were concerned about. We did not want, it was interesting, and it was a real thing. Every single year, whoever was on the cover of Madden suffered a bad season-ending injury, or they regressed significantly play style-wise. Something always bad happened to that player. I would say around end of high school, for me at least, early college when I was playing that game. I think eventually the Madden curse was broken. I don't know who broke it specifically. My theory is that back in Madden 2010, when Larry Fitzgerald and Troy Polamalu were on the cover. That might have been Madden 2011, when they put two players on the cover instead of one. I think that's when the curse was broken, so I wouldn't worry about that. Don't worry about Saquon Barkley regressing or, knock on wood, getting a serious injury next year because of the Madden curse. I think the curse is dead, and it's cool to have an Eagle back on the cover for the first time since 2006, when Donovan McNabb was on the cover of Madden. Michael Vick was close. It was down to him and Peyton Hillis after his 2010 Comeback Player of the Year season, but we all remember Peyton Hillis was on the cover, which was absolutely insane. But this is just another awesome notch in Saquon's belt for a historic 2024-2025 season. When you look at it as a whole, when you look at from the time he signed with the Eagles in free agency last year, leaving the New York Giants to join a division rival, to now being named as the player on the cover of Madden, the most famous sports game in the history of video games, I think there's a really good argument to be made that Saquon Barkley, I don't want to say it's the best season of all time. I want to say it's the most accomplished season of all time when you remove the quarterback position. And because I got a lot of pushback on that on Twitter when I said the best season, they're like, well, somebody said Jerry Rice had 21 touchdowns in 12 games. And, I talked about it last week during GOAT Week that Reggie White had a 21 sack season in, I think it was 11 or 12 starts. So yeah, best and accomplished are different. When it comes to just the body of work, what he accomplished in just 1 year, I don't know if there's another player that did what Saquon did. And I think you can make the argument for best because he was that good this season that I think you could also say that what he did this year tops just one crazy stat of, Jerry Rice having 21 touchdowns or Reggie White having 21 sacks. Saquon Barkley had 2,000 yards rushing, and he won Offensive Player of the Year, and he's a Super Bowl champion, and he's on the cover of Madden, and he's the rushing leader. And he had the most rushing yards in the history of the NFL in one season when you combine the regular season and the playoffs. Oh, and he was a first-team All-Pro. He was a Pro Bowler. He won the Burt Bell Award. I mean, there's just so many accomplishments. He was third in MVP votes. A running back in 2024 was third in MVP votes. He was the main reason the Philadelphia Eagles won a Super Bowl and beat a dynasty, a team and the Kansas City Chiefs that were knocking on the door of history. They were one game away, one win away from being the only team in the history of the NFL to three-peat. And Saquon Barkley, while in that game the Chiefs took him out, he was the main reason the Eagles were in that game and in the end won a championship. So when you just look at that entire body of work, it also add the revenge part of all of this. Saquon left the New York Giants, joined a division rival, was kind of vilified for that in New York. He goes back into New York against the Giants, breaks a record there, takes the Giants down. So he got revenge. He won a championship. He won all these different awards. He's now on the cover of the most famous sports video game of all time. And play that's featured on the cover is one of the sickest, most unique highlight reel football plays that we'll be showing our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids. It's going to be 100 years down the road. And this is going to be a play that if the NFL still exists, this is going to be a play that you see forever. Because it was so... this was a first. You just had never seen a player set up one defender, spin move around him, break another guy's ankles, see another secondary defensive back crashing downhill. He sets up the play. He was setting up, that turns his body around and hurdles a man going full speed in the air and lands on his feet and gains extra yards. And the coolest part, I think, about him being on the cover, and the coolest part of that play is the fact that he was wearing Kelly green. The aesthetic is just perfect. The fact that a Kelly green Eagles jersey is on the cover of Madden in 2026. Eagles fans are winning. The last 365 days, Saquon's a winner. Eagles fans are winners. And I think it's super neat. If this was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I played Madden religiously, I'd be concerned. I did not want Donovan McNabb on the cover in 2006. The Madden curse was real back then. McNabb got hurt, and I believe that was the Jeff Garcia season. Madden's weird, though, because they always do it's 06, but it's the 2005 video game. And in 2005, McNabb and the Eagles were terrible. That was all the TO drama. And then 2006, McNabb gets hurt. Jeff Garcia takes them on a playoff run. 2007, they go 8-8 and miss the playoffs. So the Madden curse back then was absolutely real for Donovan. 2011, Madden 11 with Peyton Hillis. I did not want Michael Vick on the cover. Vick kind of suffered a Madden curse a bit, even though he wasn't on the cover, but he was a finalist, considering the Dream Team happened the following season. But now, I do think that curse is over. I think it's really cool that an Eagle is featured. And again, I think the best and the most famous sports video game of all time. And I really do believe there are so many quarterbacks that have accomplished some historic things in an individual season. But Saquon, I will say, you add this accomplishment onto what he's done in just 1 year. There are there's been some players that have done some historic things, historic statistics put up, historic accomplishments in just one season. But when you combine the body of work of what Barkley's been able to accomplish this year, it has a really good argument to be the most accomplished, potentially the best individual season in the history of football when you remove the quarterback position. So that's awesome. I haven't bought a game of Madden since, I think, 2016. I'll definitely be buying this one just for the sake of the cover to put it in the studio. Yeah, this one's awesome, and it's definitely cool to celebrate and continue to celebrate just a famous, historic season for a player that... Another thing about what he accomplished this year is he completely revived the running back position, right? Running backs are getting paid again. Running backs are getting drafted high again. Saquon got a historic extension from Philadelphia. He revived a position that was seen as dead in the water. So it's one of the best years that you could ever have as a human being. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, the Philadelphia Eagles traded Bryce Huff last Friday to the San Francisco 49ers. I think they're pretty much set with their edge rotation for now, but if they do want more of a proven veteran edge rusher to join this roster before training camp, I actually do think there are some interesting options. We'll get into those options coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in just one place. The Post Your Job feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, so the Eagles traded Bryce Huff on Friday. No surprise. I think everybody knew a change of scenery was coming. I don't think Bryce Huff leaving suddenly puts the Eagles in this dire situation, this dire need to bring in edge rushers. I think we knew the writing was on the wall. The reason Bryce Huff was traded, in large part, was because they have Nolan Smith. They have Jalix Hunt, who they think will probably break out in year 2. They brought in Azeez Ojulari in free agency. They also signed Joshua Uche in free agency. They drafted Jahad Campbell in the first round, and while I think Campbell will play the majority of the time, the majority of his snaps as a stand-up inside linebacker, his main job is going to be to rush the quarterback. He played a lot of edge rusher at Alabama, was recruited to Alabama as an edge rusher. I think he will get snaps there as well. So the Eagles have 4 to 5 guys that they want to play in front of Bryce Huff. And so suddenly that Huff's gone. I'm not suddenly saying to myself, oh, well, now they got to bring in edge rushers, because Huff wasn't really a part of the plan, and we all knew that. And they had added options accordingly to prepare for Huff getting traded. Or I think if they couldn't get a pick for him, if like San Francisco didn't want him and there was just not another fit, I think they probably would have just outright cut him. So again, not a surprise. I don't think this suddenly changes much about their plan. I do think they want to head into training camp hoping that Jalix Hunt takes that next step, and it could be him and Nolan Smith as your top 2 edge rushers. I think they hope that Azeez Ojulari can stay healthy and be a solid 6 to 9 to 10 sack a year guy that I think he's been with the Giants when he's on the football field. I think they do hope that they can get that 2022 version of Joshua Uche out of the former second-round prospect, a guy that has had double-digit sacks in his career at the NFL level. I think that is the hope. They want those 4 guys to be the rotation. I think they want Jahad Campbell to be versatile enough where he can play both edge and inside linebacker. I think that will be the plan heading into training camp. I don't predict that they will do anything right now in free agency. But I will say, if we get to the end of July, early August, right before the preseason, maybe the first few weeks of the preseason, and Ojulari's banged up or just looks okay, maybe Jalix Hunt hasn't emerged or taken that next step, or maybe he has, but Joshua Uche looks like the player last year that was a healthy scratch in Kansas City, rather than the guy in 2022 for New England that was leading the defense in sacks. If that's the case, I do think they'll want to bring in a proven veteran edge rusher. And if they want to do that, there will be options. There are a lot of older players right now at this position that I think are purposefully waiting out training camp before they sign with a contender. And so if the Eagles want to bring in, again, somebody more proven that's a safer bet to pan out, that can contribute right away, compared to Ojulari or Uche or Hunt or Campbell, there's 3 guys that I like the options the most. So there's, I would say, 5 realistic options, and there's 3 of them that I think the Eagles would consider and that I like more than, I'll name the other 2 guys that I don't want. For instance, Von Miller, staying away from that for on-the-field reasons and for off-the-field reasons. Don't think it's worth it. Preston Smith is also a free agent, a pretty proven, high sack production player that gets, 5 to 10 sacks a year. But when you look at him and Von Miller's numbers the last few years, the injuries, the significant dip in production, I think those guys are kind of shot at this point. I would rather just stick with Ojulari and Uche. But if you look at a Zadarius Smith or a Matthew Judon, Look, Jadeveon Clowney over my dead body. You guys know I never want to see that guy in an Eagles jersey after what he did to Carson Wentz in 2019. He is one of my most hated players in all of football, but I will say he is a productive player on the edge. Like, he can get you 5 to 7 sacks a year. He's kind of a mercenary. He just jumps from team to team, signing one-year contracts. He had, 5.5 sacks with the Panthers last year. Solid player. Like, if they want, again, a more proven third or fourth guy in the rotation, Clowney is out there. He is an unrestricted free agent. Those are the three guys I think the Eagles would consider the most that are still productive. Von Miller at this point is just a name, in my opinion. Same with Preston Smith. If you look at the numbers, the production's just not there. I like the options of Zadarius Smith and Matthew Judon the best, and I think they would also consider Jadeveon Clowney. But Zadarius Smith, last year was traded from the Cleveland Browns to the Detroit Lions, who desperately needed pass rushing help on the edge after Aiden Hutchinson got hurt. And Zadarius Smith had 9 sacks last year combined between his time with Cleveland and Detroit. Smith is a player that consistently can still get to the quarterback, even though he's in his 30s. Matthew Judon, not the player he was at the end of his time with Baltimore or early on with the Patriots, but he is still a player that last year got 5 to 6 sacks. Like, he's a 5 to 7 sack a year guy. And again, that's what you're going to get in free agency in June or July or August. And I think that, again, Ojulari and Uche can be those players. I think Ojulari has been that guy. I think they want to see that through, see if those players are looking okay in training camp and can be relied upon in a 3 to 4 man rotation. But if they don't look great, or if somebody gets hurt, or Jalix Hunt doesn't look like he's progressing or has kind of plateaued, those are some interesting names to keep an eye out for. Like, if I had to predict the Eagles sign a player before the season, I do think it would be an edge rusher, and I think it would be one of these 3 players: Zadarius Smith, Matthew Judon, or Jadeveon Clowney. I would rank it based on preference. I would want Zadarius Smith, then Matthew Judon. You guys know how I feel. The Jadeveon Clowney cheap shot, I'll never get over. In a way, it helped propel the Eagles into this golden era, this potential dynasty that's forming. So I understand that. But in a vacuum, in that moment, I don't think I've ever hated a player in sports more for something they did to my football team than when Clowney speared Carson Wentz with his head, put him into the ground when he was already into the ground himself, pile drive Carson Wentz's head into the turf, concussion, out for the wild card round of the playoffs in 2019 after just 2 drives. That's tough for me to get over, but he's a productive player. He's solid, and I think the Eagles would be interested, again, if Ojulari and Uche just are not coming along. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, the Eagles just won one of the most historic, dominant Super Bowls in the history of the NFL, cemented their legacy, but I do think 2025 has potentially just as much importance as the 2024 Super Bowl win, if not more. And I'll tell you why coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, so after a second Super Bowl win of that magnitude, what the Eagles did last year, this era of Eagles football, again, the legacies have been cemented. We now know, there is no fluke. This is a top 2 team of the decade when you go from, I would say the start of Howie Roseman's second stint and in 2016, the Carson Wentz trade and forward. Since then, it's them and the Kansas City Chiefs. They've been the 2 most consistent teams in the NFL. I think 2017, some, not us, but I think a lot of people did look at that championship as very fluky before this year. But now that the Eagles won another championship, we know the legacies are cemented. We know this Eagles team, they have the formula. The Eagles know what it takes to win titles, especially since they won it with 2 completely different looking teams in less than a decade. We now know who this Eagles football team is. They beat, again, a historic Kansas City Chiefs football team that was looking for a three-peat in dominating fashion. I know the final score was 40-22. We all know the real final score, though, was 40-6. So 2024 was very important historically for the Eagles, for a lot of individual legacies. I do personally think that 2024 Eagles team was a top 5 team of all time. Again, they dethroned the Chiefs. They got their revenge from 2022. They stopped the three-peat. There was so much historic significance in last season. But I will say, 2025 actually has another level of potential to get to. When you think about it, this team, what they could do if they won a championship in 2025, you could start to use the D word, dynasty. 3 rings, I think, is when you start to talk about a dynasty in sports. 1 ring, a lot of teams can win 1 ring in sports. 2 rings, okay, that's consistent. That's a dominant team. That could be an all-decade team. You know that's going to be like the gold standard of an organization in any league. But I wouldn't consider 2 rings a dynasty. When you get 3 in less than 10 years, that's when you're talking about a dynasty. And if you do that, if you win a championship, especially by repeating this year, that puts you in rare company in NFL history. There's only a few teams in the history of this league that have been able to repeat. So if they win 3, there's a lot riding on this season. You can be talked about. Right now, again, 2 rings is like, okay, it cemented the legitimacy of the first one, that Howie Roseman is a historic all-time general manager in the history of the NFL. The Eagles core of, the Lane Johnsons and the Brandon Grahams and, Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey, and now the Jalen Hurts era and all the Georgia Bulldogs, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. Like, we know this is the golden era of Eagles football. This is the team that figured out the championship winning formula. Even if they had to have a new head coach and a new quarterback, like Howie Roseman figured it out. 2 titles in less than 10 years. That's a historic run. But again, if you get 3 in less than a decade, if you repeat as champions, that's again when we're talking about a dynasty. We're talking about an all-time football team, an all-time run, especially if you beat a team like the Kansas City Chiefs again, or a team like the Buffalo Bills who have an all-time great quarterback in Josh Allen, or if they take down a Lamar Jackson or a Joe Burrow. Again, the Eagles can enter rare company in NFL history if they are able to get this done again in 2025. And I think this team can do it. I think this is the team to do it if there's going to be one. This core has learned through their time in college at Alabama, in Georgia, and competing for championships year after year. And now you look at the last 2 to 3 years, really the Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts era, all these players that have been here for these championship runs, you combine college and the pros, these players know what it takes to consistently be a title contender. And you can tell just naturally it's now who these guys are because they've been doing it for so, like, you look at Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, Nolan Smith. These guys have been consistent title contenders since they were freshmen in college. Like, it's been going on almost a decade now. And those Georgia Bulldogs, like, they repeated as champions. Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith consistently every year were competing for a national title. And now in Philadelphia, consistently every year are competing for a Super Bowl. So I think this team is much better equipped than the 2018 Eagles to potentially put themselves in that dynastic conversation. They have, again, repeating is very, very difficult in the NFL. The only teams to do it in my lifetime are the New England Patriots in the early 2000s and the Kansas City Chiefs last year and in 2022. Before that, it was, the Dallas Cowboys in the early 90s. You had a repeat with the 49ers in the 80s. But, like, it happens maybe once every 10 to 20 years, if that. Sometimes not even that. Like, it's very difficult to repeat as champions. If the Eagles, again, are going to propel themselves into another stratosphere, and they already did after 2024. Again, there was so much historic significance in last year's win. That is a top 5 team in the history of football. 2 rings, 1 ring. Okay, anybody can trip into a championship ring. Not to discredit 2017. But when you get 2, I think that's a pattern in sports. Like, okay, especially when you have the same general manager, when you have a lot of the same core pieces, or just the same core fundamentals, you're like, yep, they figured it out. They know how to win a title. But 3 is when you're talking dynasty, especially if you repeat as champions and you do it against some of the star monster quarterbacks in the AFC conference. And this is the team I think that can do it. 2018, that team was new to winning. They were new to competing for championships. They didn't really know how to handle that success, and it feels like they didn't really want to move on from that Super Bowl 52 celebration until it was almost too late. It was like halfway through the year, the regular season of 2018, they finally snapped out of it, and they're like, oh crap, we're 4-6. We got to run the table and make the playoffs. They snapped out of it and almost made it back to the NFC Championship, so credit to them. But this team is different. Like this team, again, they've done this at the college level and the NFL level now for most of these guys, 5 to 8 to 10 years. I mean, Jalen Hurts has been doing this since the 2016 national championship against Clemson as a true freshman at Alabama, as an 18 or 19-year-old freshman quarterback. And that was 9 years ago. So these guys, they're the ones, if the Eagles are going to do this, they do have the right core. I was even listening to the Exciting Mike's podcast the other day with Cooper DeJean and Reed Blankenship, and just hearing them talk to Saquon Barkley, who was on the show, about like getting ready for this season, how they've already kind of mentally moved on. That's really encouraging. And as much as I want to enjoy this past Super Bowl win and not give up on that, I don't want to move on yet, and for months I feel like I'm going to feel that way. For them, it is awesome to hear that players, I don't want to say they don't care anymore, but they're ready for the next season. And that's huge because, again, I don't think that 2018 Eagles team, like Doug Peterson and Nick Foles, were on like book tours in August, like during the preseason. They were celebrating that championship win for the majority of the year, and as they should have. Like, I totally get that. It was the first win in franchise history in a Super Bowl, and I think a lot of those players had never been there before and never won a ring. There was only a few that had done it with other NFL teams. I totally understand it, but the fact of the matter is that team wasn't battle-tested, wasn't a title veteran like a lot of these players are. So I think 2025 is really, really important. If the Eagles want to get into a completely different conversation, and not just the history of the NFL, but the history of sports, like all-time great teams, all-time great dynasties, that's what they can do this year. So I don't think there's going to be any sort of complacency or satisfaction that their cup is full. Like, we got revenge against the Chiefs. We stopped the three-peat. We've won 2 rings in a decade. Like, whatever. Like, if we win, awesome. If we don't, we don't. I don't think that's the mindset at all. I think this team is going to be very hungry to do this. Because, again, there's new things. I get the complacency and the satisfaction when there's nothing new to fight for. There's nothing new to accomplish. It's kind of just the same thing and over again. And, yeah, you stack that. Your resume looks great all time. But when there's new things to accomplish, that's where that hunger stays. And there's a lot for them individually, too, like Jalen Hurts. There's a lot of quarterbacks that have 1 ring. Like Joe Flacco has a ring. Trent Dilfer has a ring. Matt Stafford has a Super Bowl. There's a lot of guys that have 1 championship. 2, multiple rings, that's, again, for his legacy, too. That's when you start getting in the all-time conversation as well. For a lot of these players, they can get into that conversation. So 2025 is very important, and there's a lot to play for. Like, I think that sounds obvious, but there's a lot of teams, there's a lot of cores that have won championships, and they're like, okay, we're good. Like, we don't need more. What else is there to do? The Eagles, there's a lot to do. They're in unique territory right now. And again, a win in 2025 could do a lot for them historically. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. You can find us on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.